Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into a topic that's well, it's generating a lot of buzz, to say the least. We're talking ABDL today.
Definitely a subject that deserves a closer look, peeling back the layers a bit.
Exactly. And that's what we're here for, right? To get
Yeah.
past the hype and really understand what this community is all about, especially when it comes to self-acceptance in relationships.
It's about time we had these conversations openly and honestly.
Couldn't agree more. So, to guide our deep dive today, we're turning to You're Not Broken, Dr. Rhoda's Guide to Strong Self-Worth for ABD Dales.
Oh, excellent choice. That book was eye-opening, to say the least.
Right. It's compassionate, but it doesn't shy away from the research, which I appreciate.
Dr. Rhoda really knows her stuff. She brings this unique blend of personal experience and academic rigor to the table.
And that's what makes it such a compelling read. Before we get too far, though, let's make sure we're all on the same page with some key terms. I'll admit, even I had to do a bit of a refresher.
Sure, terminology can be tricky in this area. You'll see autonepophilia thrown around sometimes, which sounds very clinical.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful.
It is. And honestly, it's not a term that resonates with most people in the community. It puts too much emphasis on the sexual aspect.
Right, like we were saying earlier, it's about more than just that.
Exactly. Now, when we talk about adult baby, we're talking about individuals who identify with a younger headspace. Important to remember that this doesn't mean they're like stuck in childhood or anything.
It's more about an internal experience, right?
Precisely. It's about finding comfort and expressing oneself authentically. Then you have diaper lover, which, well, that one's a bit more self-explanatory.
It's all about those sensory experiences, from what I understand.
Could be, or it could be about stress relief, even sexual arousal. It's a spectrum, really.
Makes sense. Now, what about this whole age play thing? I feel like that term gets thrown around a lot, but I'm not always sure people understand what it really means.
Good point. Age play usually involves role-playing, often with a caregiver dynamic. But it's crucial to remember, and Dr. Rhoda emphasizes this, that it's always consensual and distinct from any genuine mental regression that some adult babies might experience.
So it's a conscious choice with clear boundaries.
Exactly. And that distinction is so important to make. Now, I know we can't talk about this topic without addressing the elephant in the room, the thing that often overshadows any conversation about ABDL.
You're talking about a pedophilia myth.
The one and only. And thankfully, Dr. Rhoda doesn't shy away from tackling it head on.
Yeah, she lays down the research pretty clearly in the book.
She does, citing studies by Deschatels and Forsyth, Aronovich and Siwiak, Doshi, just to name a few.
Sounds like a who's who of, well, a very specific field of study.
Right. But the takeaway from all of that research is clear. There's absolutely no link between ABDL and pedophilia.
It's about consenting adults exploring fantasies and roles, not children. And conflating the two is not only inaccurate, but incredibly damaging.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And it really got me thinking about, the whole idea of self-acceptance. Because it's one thing to understand the facts, but it's another thing entirely to live it. Especially when you're facing, well, let's be honest, a lot of judgment from society.
It's true. That stigma is very real.
There's this part in the book where Dr. Rhoda talks about being in group therapy, and she wanted to open up about her experiences, but she couldn't bring herself to say it out loud.
It's like that fear of being judged, even rejected by the people you're supposed to feel safest with.
Exactly. And it really resonated with me because I think we've all felt that way at some point, like wanting to share something that feels really personal, but being afraid of how people will react.
Absolutely. And it speaks to something Dr. Rhoda emphasizes throughout the book, which is that self-acceptance doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's influenced by our families, our friends, even the messages we absorb from society as a whole.
It's like she says in chapter 3, those early experiences, those beliefs we pick up, they become the lens through which we see ourselves.
It's like, imagine being given a pair of glasses as a kid and they're slightly distorted. You don't even realize it, but you're seeing the world through that warped perspective.
And then you grow up and you start to question, wait a minute, is everyone else seeing things differently than me?
And that can be really disorienting. But it can also be the first step towards self-discovery, towards questioning those ingrained beliefs and figuring out what rings true for you.
One thing I didn't expect to see in a book about ABDL was, well, toxic masculinity.
Interesting, right. But it actually makes a lot of sense when you think about it.
It's like we don't often associate vulnerability and nurturing with traditional ideas of what it means to be a man.
Exactly. And so for men who find comfort in the ABDL headspace, which often involves, embracing those softer sides of themselves, it can create this internal conflict.
Like they're being pulled in two different directions.
Exactly. And that's where building resilience comes in, which Dr. Rhoda talks about extensively in Chapter 8.
She gives some really great advice for cultivating that inner strength. Things like challenging negative thought patterns, practicing self-care.
It's about recognizing that resilience isn't about never struggling. It's about learning how to navigate those challenges without losing sight of who you are.
It's like that saying, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf.
I like that. It's about finding ways to stay afloat, even when things feel stormy.
You know, one thing that really resonated with me was her emphasis on challenging negative self-talk.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to get caught up in those thoughts, like, I'm not good enough, I'm different, I'm alone.
It's like those thoughts become a broken record player in your mind, just repeating the same negative messages over and over again.
And Dr. Rhoda gives you the tools to hit the stop button on that record player.
She provides exercises for reframing those thoughts, for challenging their validity, and ultimately replacing them with more positive and empowering beliefs.
It's like she's saying, don't believe everything you think. And that can be incredibly freeing, don't you think?
Absolutely. And that kind of inner work, that journey of self-discovery and self-acceptance, it lays the foundation for healthier relationships, too. Because, let's face it, relationships can be tricky enough as it is.
Well, tell me about it.
But when you add in the layer of navigating societal stigma and potential misunderstandings, it can feel really daunting to open up to a partner.
It's like, how do you even begin to have that conversation?
Well, that's where Dr. Rhoda's advice on negotiation comes in. Chapter 10 was like a masterclass in communication. She gives you these 7 steps for approaching difficult conversations with empathy, clarity, and this genuine desire to find common ground.
I love how she emphasizes active listening, really trying to understand your partner's perspective, even if it's different from your own.
It's about creating a space where both people feel safe to express their needs and desires without fear of judgment.
One thing that really stuck with me was the idea of starting from a place of agreement.
Oh, I love that part. It's so simple, but so powerful, right? Instead of focusing on the points of contention, you start by identifying the things you already agree on.
It's like building a bridge instead of a wall.
Exactly. And then there's that brilliant analogy she uses, island, then peninsula.
I was thinking about that analogy earlier. It's such a great visual.
It is. She talks about how each person in a relationship has their own island, those non-negotiables that are core to their identity and well-being.
It's about honoring your own needs and boundaries first and foremost.
Precisely. And then you can explore the possibility of a peninsula, that shared space where your needs and your partner's needs can overlap and coexist.
It's about finding that sweet spot where both partners feel seen, heard, and respected without having to sacrifice who they are at their core. And you know what else really struck me about that analogy?
What's that?
It's not just about romantic relationships, is it?
That's a good point.
It applies to any kind of relationship, really. Friendships, family, even colleagues at work.
It's about finding that balance between staying true to yourself and finding common ground with others.
Exactly. And speaking of finding things, Chapter 13 of this book is like a treasure trove of resources. Seriously, Dr. Rhoda holds nothing back.
It's an incredible compilation. There's something there for everyone, no matter where they are on their journey.
Books, podcasts, websites, even information about ABDL conventions.
It really highlights the sense of community that exists, which I think is so important.
It's like, if this book is the map, Chapter 13 is the guidebook, ready to show you all the cool spots.
Exactly. And, it all comes back to that core message of self-acceptance. It's not just about understanding the facts. It's about embracing who you are fully and authentically.
And finding the courage to share that with the world.
It's not always easy, but it's so worth it. And I think that's what Dr. Rhoda's book does so beautifully. It gives people permission to be themselves without shame or judgment.
It's like she's saying, you are not broken. You are worthy of love and acceptance just as you are.
And that's a message everyone needs to hear, don't you think?
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, no matter where you are on your journey, remember, you are not alone. And you are worthy. Until next time, keep exploring, keep growing, and keep being your amazing selves.